While a trainee at Allen Overy, Alexander Kardos-Nyheim founded and led to acquisition SafeSign Technologies, a frontier AI startup specializing in legal LLMs. The Cambridge and MIT-based startup was acquired in a blockbuster exit by the media tech giant Thomson Reuters in August 2024. Alexander previously read law at Cambridge and, alongside his current executive role at Thomson Reuters, leads an international academic journal and a law reform organization. Alex, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on, and thank you for being our first ever guest. Would you mind if you could just give a brief elevator pitch, bit background info to yourself?
Of course, and it's a great honor to be the first guest on the podcast. And I've been following along with, I think, a lot of the rest of the industry, the growth of your blog and commentary on the legal tech space. And, it's a real pleasure to be here. My background personally is as a lawyer and as a tech founder. I founded a company called SafeSign Technologies, a frontier LLM developer out of Cambridge and MIT. Alongside my training contract at Allen Overy between 2022 and 2024. And then in 2024, we were acquired by Thomson Reuters, a large NASDAQ-listed company that is the dominant provider of legal technology to the industry, as well as to the tax and accounting professions, and of course, also the parent company of Reuters, the global press agency. My focus when starting SafeSign was to develop safe, robust, and reliable LLMs for serious real-world use cases. We've heard so much about hallucinations, about toxic model behaviors, about bias in these large language models. And what I was trying to do was to try to realize the real opportunity of AI for high-stakes, accuracy-critical verticals like law. The truth is that lawyers are never going to adopt AI in a meaningful way if they don't trust its outputs. So the idea was, let's put together a world-leading team, develop very robust, reliable AI, and deploy that to lawyers in a trustworthy way. Our journey as a startup was cut short in a way through this early acquisition, and we can always talk more about that later in the podcast. But it's been quite a journey. Very pleased to be here, of course, and very keen to talk through some of the big issues that have come up in the industry in recent months and years.
Nice. And Alex, you mentioned that you founded the legal tech startup doing your training contract at A&O. How on earth did you find the time whilst balancing that at a Magic Circle firm?
I asked myself the same question. It was a combination of some very understanding partners who supervised me in my 4 seats during my training contract, and an ungodly amount of sleepless nights. I do not miss a life where I was averaging maybe 3 to 4 hours a night of sleep on a good week. It was a combination of trying to be at least an acceptable trainee at a very demanding firm, with having to raise money, manage a team, enforce a strategy, adapt a strategy in a cutting edge startup for 2 years at a time when it felt like we were, from the startup side, we were on a little raft with our little team of people in the middle of a huge ocean, in the middle of a thunderstorm, and every day was a question of survival. But at the same time, in addition to surviving in the most industrially competitive and economically challenging industry in the world, which is the AI industry, we had to be able to have the peace of mind and the focus to develop what turned out to be a world-leading technology. But that balance of trying to write the memo for the partner in the morning, at lunchtime, hire a new CTO for my startup, in the afternoon, finish with drafting the legal opinion for the tax partner, and then in the evening, going and trying to raise money because the next day I had to pay 30 salaries. all of that was a total nightmare. And the only reason we survived was due to a lot of luck and due to the resilience of a pretty exceptional team that I was lucky enough to join me in this journey. But it is not one that I would recommend if you value your sanity, if you value your sleep. But it is a journey I would recommend if you want to lead a life that is slightly unusual, if you want to pursue something that is out of the ordinary, if you have a dream and an idea, and you like the idea of putting a team around that and raising interest, raising money, and delivering a real product or a real end that brings value to people, then it's absolutely the journey I'd recommend. And increasingly, I've come across lawyers who have both the intelligence and the rigor that comes with legal training, but also the creativity that comes with being able to start a business. So I think legal technology and the legal industry is uniquely placed to deliver some pretty exceptional founders.
Such an insane journey. I can just imagine like working on the startup before work, lunch and after. But
Yeah,
massive
it was quite something.
kudos to you for doing that. And I think that moves us on to our next question quite nicely, which is really about the investment landscape. We've both seen, especially with Legora and Harvey, that they're raising insane amounts of money. They're partnering with every single major law firm under the sun. Um, but OpenAI themselves recently on their development day released their like document review agents. And do you think that like big tech such as OpenAI are going to be verticalizing into law rather than just providing the background infrastructure such as the LLMs? And where do you think that leaves the next wave of legal tech founders?
I think you've hit on two very important points, which are structural points about not just the legal tech industry, but big tech more widely.
Mm,
The first is consolidation. We're finding that in applied settings like law, but of course, the same applies to pharma, drug discovery, engineering, all the rest. We're finding that it used to be a sustainable business model to take someone else's AI model, an off-the-shelf model, wrap it in some nice user interface, some customization that makes it relevant to a target industry. And then in that target industry, you get a few clients, a few customers on your roster, you get a good AAR, annual recurring revenue going, ARR rather, and then you get um, a conventional SaaS business that attracts VC funding, and then you expand that in a conventional way. Now, what has since happened is that whereas before you had many smaller businesses emerging that were quite easily attracting VC money, you are now finding, as at least in legal technology, that a much smaller number of businesses, backed usually directly by big tech companies like OpenAI and Google,
mm,
um, they are attracting a majority of the VC funding. Uh, they are dominating the industry narrative, and they are squeezing out the smaller players who usually had oxygen, had breathing room to flourish. So consolidation is one point. It's going into a much smaller pool of sort of blue chip players who are dominating the industry. The second point you've touched on is verticalization directly by big tech companies into applied settings like law. If you were to be cynical, one might say that Harvey is the forward presence, the scouts, if you like, of OpenAI and Google. OpenAI and Google have both invested in Harvey. They are both known to be interested in law as an industry that will use their technology. You've also indicated, and this is totally true, that these big tech companies, whether it's Google DeepMind, Anthropic, Mistral, Meta, OpenAI, they have created a fundamental dominance and have become the foundation of how technology is created today in a way that maybe was not the case in any previous era of technological innovation. Currently, a small pool of businesses control the compute, they control the models, they control how those models are deployed. And that means that almost every AI business that comes around today, every AI startup that decides to have a go at deploying an LLM to a certain vertical like law, has some level of fundamental reliance on 4 or 5 companies in the world. And those companies may decide to go into law themselves. So what happens if you're a startup, even a well-funded startup like Harvey, and you use other people's models? So Harvey call themselves a multi-model, so they use the models of these big providers.
Yeah.
And what happens if those providers decide, well, actually, we want to deploy our models directly to these law firms. We don't want to go through you, Harvey, or for that matter, through any other legal technology startup. That's always been a structural risk that investors have known about. But as you've referred to, the recent move by OpenAI with DocuGPT, which is a contract review tool, indicates a very firm intention to verticalize directly into law. We also are aware of relationships where, for example, Google DeepMind have entered into direct partnerships with global large law firms, potentially to custom train models for them. That's another example of verticalization. And then, of course, if you look at Harvey, Harvey is backed by OpenAI. In many ways, it was seen as an OpenAI spin-out. It has participation from Google Ventures in an investment capacity. So you could definitely see Harvey as being an attempt by these big tech players to get their foot in the door in law before they decide they're actually going to do it themselves. And Harvey, in a way, is acquiring a lot of important information for the likes of Google, should they ever want to go into law. Harvey is acquiring an extraordinary pool of prompts created by the world's leading law firms, such that if you were ever going to develop a model specialized on law, you have the golden pool of questions that Magic Circle and American large law firms want to ask. And then if you can train your models to answer those, then you can dominate the legal technology industry yourself when you decide to do so. So this is my long-winded way of saying, yes, we are seeing consolidation in the market that makes it very difficult to raise money for a brand new startup nowadays, because Harvey and Legora and Norm AI, for example, more recently, are attracting the attention in terms of mind space and also in terms of capital. But then you also have the secondary, and I think slightly more serious risk, which is that the big tech firms will themselves verticalize into law, as well as other industries, making it difficult even for Harvey and Legora to maintain relevance in the future, let alone a smaller startup. The final thing I'd say on this point is, well, that's a bit of a doomsday picture, but what if you're a lawyer and you have extraordinary domain expertise in law, you have the ability to get a technical co-founder? Is there any space for you to develop a successful legal tech startup today? And I think the answer is yes, but the standard is much higher. You not only need to be a very well-qualified lawyer who understands a pain point for lawyers, but you also need to be a technology company in the truest sense. You cannot be simply taking someone else's technology and redeploying it for your use case, because then you're falling into that trap of being dependent on OpenAI until they decide to verticalize and displace you. I think you need to develop novel IP from a technological standpoint that makes you valuable, not just to a large law firm, but indeed to OpenAI itself. If you're able to solve a technological challenge that is posed by law in the AI setting, one that has not yet been solved by, let's say, OpenAI through their models, then you become not just a valuable legal tech company to lawyers, but you become a valuable tech acquisition opportunity by a big tech player. And I would say that that is the way to go if you want to start a legal tech company today. But of course, it means you need an extremely well-qualified founding team on the technology side, as well as on the legal side. But happy to talk more about that a bit later on, but that would be my headline point on that.
I definitely agree with that. I definitely think we're going to see more hyper specialization where, they want to get
Yeah,
their IP, the workflows, and we're going to see really specialized use cases that, the massive chatbots such as Harvey and Lagora simply can't do because it's too
yeah,
general for them. It's also interesting you say that because I think I've heard on another podcast that Winston said that their biggest competitor isn't Lagora, but actually OpenAI themselves.
totally.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's going to be interesting how that plays out 2026 and beyond. So on to our next question. I think everyone on LinkedIn especially is saying, oh, data is the moat on legal AI. But if you're using off-the-shelf LLMs, such as the ones from Anthropic, Mistral, OpenAI, and then you're doing a bit of RAG with them over some documents, then where is the defensibility in these new startups? Is it the interface? Is it the workflows? Or is it the data? Because it's not necessarily the LLMs anymore.
It's a very good question. This is something that I've been grappling with. If I try to put myself back into my startup shoes, very briefly, I'll address the question from that experience
Mm,
because what made my startup successful in the end was that it was developing a proprietary large language model. So we were going straight to the heart of the question, which was everyone's using off-the-shelf LLMs. Off-the-shelf LLMs are not trained specifically for law. They're trained to do 1,000 different industries broadly well. We would like to train the LLM to do at least one industry, hopefully more than one, but at least one industry extremely well. So we thought, let's go to the heart of the matter, to the core technology, and let's develop a better version of that, a legal foundation model. And that's where our defensibility came from. Now,
mhm,
it's very hard to develop your own model. And also, developing your own large language model can mean all sorts of things. It can range from light fine tuning of a model, which frankly a lot of people can do, all the way to what we were doing, which was really foundational engineering of a model from scratch, which is this sort of thing that only, I would say, probably less than 1,000 people in the world are able to do. And they're distributed across the senior groups in the big tech companies. And if you're lucky enough as a startup to get one or two of them, like we did, then you can do it as well as a startup. But if you're not developing your own model, as we were, then the question is, how else can you create a defensible company? Now, the thing is, let's just bake in as an assumption that you're using an off-the-shelf LLM. There is some value in choosing the right LLM for the job. So you need good evaluations, hopefully by subject matter experts like lawyers to assess, well, I think Gemini 3 is actually better than GPT-5 at this kind of use case. Sounds a bit basic, but having a good evaluation mechanism as a startup, enabling you to choose the right model for the right use case, is a very solid starting point that adds some level of defensibility, but not much. But to give you an example, Harvey talks a lot about being multi-model, where they match use cases to models, and they see that as a value proposition. So there's no reason why as a startup why you shouldn't see that as a value proposition. Fine. So you've chosen the right model for your use case. That's some starting point of a moat.
yeah.
The next question is RAG. Now, unless you're training a model to memorize information in a closed book setting, you are showing the model in an open book exam style setting what the answer is while it's answering your question. And that is what RAG is. It's about showing the model what you think to be relevant information to help it answer your question better. The truth is that RAG is not a perfected art yet. There are research groups operating around the world who are trying to improve RAG, and who are also trying to improve the process of retrieving the right results that you then surface in the RAG. Something that I encounter in my everyday life here at Thomson Reuters is that
Mm,
Westlaw and Practical Law have RAG engines that operate. They have LLM features, and then they have retrieval engines that pull parts of Westlaw and Practical Law up to show the LLM relevant case law, relevant guidance, relevant commentary, and then the LLM answers the question, hopefully better as a result of those retrieved results. The truth is that that retrieval engine is far from perfect, which means that even if you have theoretical access to great data, if you're not retrieving it effectively, you end up confusing the model potentially, because you're showing the model potentially irrelevant information. So there is some defensibility in having a good RAG engine, in having your data structured well, and in having the ability to surface the right information to your LLM rather than irrelevant information. So the first defensibility that we've discussed is choosing the right LLM. The next defensibility point is having a robust RAG engine, which frankly, even large companies like Thomson Reuters are dealing with as an active challenge. The next point, and I think this is really the core of your question, is what is the real value of data nowadays? We know that LLMs are trained on the World Wide Web during pre-training by these big tech companies. We also know that these large language models are exposed to some more specialist data sets along the way that we might not be aware of. So not just what's on Reddit and Wikipedia, but they might have access to some more specialized data sets within their training pipelines at Google DeepMind or other places. But the truth is, and I suspect we'll talk more about this later in the context of law firms, but the truth is that domain-specific data sets, like law, are hard to come by because they are proprietary. They're often not even online, unless you're talking about Lexis or Thomson Reuters or other similar kinds of products. And therefore, if you can pair high-quality domain-specific data, whether that's law more generally or a certain practice area within law, with a very good model, that becomes a very important point of defensibility. And the way I see things going is that the future relevance of law firms, the future relevance of legal information holders in the AI age relies on their ability to convert their historical lead in expertise into a future lead in machine readable, high quality data that LLMs can interact with. Because the truth is that Google doesn't have the best legal data sets available to it. But if you, as a law firm or as a legal information provider, or even as a smaller legal tech business, if you are able to bring to bear high grade proprietary data, that is something that can improve models, whether in a RAG or in a training context. So I think data is extremely important. Now, going briefly to the interface and the workflows, I'll be honest here. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of legal tech companies and asked them, why do you think you're going to win in the next 2-3 years? And I've heard answers like, well, we have a Microsoft plugin and the other competitor doesn't. We have a more aesthetically pleasing user interface and the other competitor does not. Yes, that's going to get you a few contracts here and there with law firms who have that level of thinking. That is not a structural defensibility that is going to protect you in the next few years. So when I hear about user interface, when I hear about workflows, I think, yes, of course, you need to be usable. And Legora and Harvey are doing an amazing job of creating really excellent user interfaces with workflows that are built on actual use cases from within law firms, but I regard that as more of a cosmetic layer. And for me, that can keep you going for the next year. But if you want to be a company in 5 years, you need to have unique high quality data that no one else has, and you need to have proprietary technology that the big tech companies don't have. And that for me is the formula.
Yeah, don't have and want to buy, I'd definitely say.
Quite.
Yeah.
Quite.
Yeah, moving on to like looking at AI native law firms, I definitely think law firms are going to turn into more of a technology business instead of just being like a traditional law firm. And so I've got a bit of a theoretical question here, which is that, say if theoretically Freshfields or any big law firm wanted to become AI native, do these legacy firms have cultural and structural barriers that prevent them from truly transforming? And what does it really take to become an AI native law firm? Do you think legacy firms like this will be able to transform, or is it only going to be the startup law firms that are going to be able to pull it off?
I spend a lot of time talking to the likes of Skadden and Freshfields to in my capacity here as co-leading foundational research at Thomson Reuters to try and understand how they see themselves in the future.
Mhm.
Now, without naming any names, there are certainly big firms that say we are who we are. We have our precedents, we have our know-how, we have our reputation in the market. It's gone fairly well so far. Why do we need to change? And yes, we can use AI to make our lawyers a bit more efficient, but frankly, why should that change our fundamental business model or strategy as a business? There's another camp of law firms, and this is a growing camp that says, well, the truth is that if AGI is around the corner, or forget AGI, if more and more capable models are coming around that our clients themselves use first to answer a legal question before they consult a global law firm,
Mm.
uh, and I know for a fact that this is happening, then we do need to adapt. And then the question is, how do you adapt in the age of AI? And um, and those firms that I've spoken to that see the need to adapt see their data, as I referred to before, as being the fundamental uh, force multiplier, the fundamental distinguishing factor that will enable them to survive in the AI age. Um, so the question is, how do you, as a huge global law firm, become an AI native firm? Well, what you're bringing to the AI puzzle is the data piece. If you're a law firm, the data and the know-how, and therefore you need your data to be machine readable, to be structured and curated in a way that can either be used to train a custom model on your data. So think of a large language model trained to speak and act like a Skadden litigation partner. That's something that I think could be quite interesting to a lot of firms. But to do that, you need your iManage or your SharePoint or however you've distributed your know-how over the last 150 years of your history. You need that data to be structured in a way that an AI model can make use of it for training. Or indeed, if you don't want to do training, if you just want a RAG interface that searches through your law firm's data and surfaces relevant precedents and makes that usable by an LLM, you need to have a big team of data engineers that restructures all that historical data into something usable. That is something that I struggle with personally here in my job, because one of my responsibilities is to convert literally hundreds of billions of documents, which Thomson Reuters has from its history as being the dominant legal information provider, into machine readable structured documents that an LLM can be trained on, as we're doing here. And that is not something that is straightforward. That is something that requires a lot of data engineers. And to your point about turning into a technology company, law firms are going to have to hire loads of data engineers who have enough knowledge of both machine readable LLM training data as well as legal data and
Mhm.
what lawyers do so that they can adapt. Now, what are the other barriers that exist? I think one that is often overlooked, if we're talking about this data piece, and I'm sorry to talk about data so much, but I really think it's fundamental.
Yeah.
Um, if we look at the data piece, the fact is that law firms operate firewalls uh, for conflict of interest purposes. So there will be lawyers, of course, who are not allowed to even look into a file because they've acted for a client that is on the other side of a matter. And what do you do then? If you're trying to create a searchable RAG system or indeed a comprehensive training database for a model, how do you reflect the Chinese walls that a law firm has in its databases into Chinese walls that an LLM can respect? Because what you don't want is for the LLM to be conflicting you by pulling up information that you shouldn't have seen,
Mm.
but which you've now seen. And this is quite tricky. It's not an insurmountable obstacle, but I think reflecting Chinese walls in how you structure your data for LLM training or RAG or the RAG setting is very important, and one that has not yet been solved. And I think if a startup came along with a serious solution for that, they would become very interesting very quickly to a lot of legal tech players. Now, turning to, I think, the more interesting questions about culture and structural barriers. People often talk about the billable hour model as being something that puts law firms on a sort of existential crisis, because they think, well, we've always billed by the hour. Therefore, if we're being more efficient now with AI models, are we going to have to reduce our rates, etc.? The truth is, and I'm sure you've heard this too, that the billable hour model only came in relatively recently in the grand scheme of things. This has not been a fundamental aspect of law firms' existence for hundreds of years. This is something that came along in the 70s and 80s, more from the American side of the industry. And previously, and indeed this still exists today in some firms, previously there were flat fee structures where a client quantified in monetary terms how much a certain legal issue mattered to it. A law firm quantified what amount of risk it was willing to take in terms of lawyers' time to address that pain point, that legal problem for that client. And then they had a mutually agreed flat fee structure. The way I see it, I think AI is going to result in a return to the flat fee billing model. And I think there is increasing openness to that from lawyers as soon as they realize that it can actually help them make more money because they can take on more clients, albeit on a flat fee basis. And therefore, that structural or economic barrier to AI native adoption, I think, is going to go. It's going to take a couple of law firms to lead the way on that, but I can probably name already a couple in my own head, of course, that I think are going to do that. So structurally, I think the barriers are going. Culturally is probably where you're going to see the biggest barriers. And I think if I had to boil down the main cultural barrier to AI adoption, it is the issue of trust. I think the truth is that as a society, let alone as a risk-averse industry, we have not yet become comfortable with the idea that an AI model can replicate the expansive human expertise in certain industries. And of course, we have these recurring concepts of hallucination, data leakage, model toxicity, model bias that make us think, well, really, we ought to keep this with the humans for now. I think this is only a matter of time before this conception goes away. The truth is that in pure cognitive terms, if you can think of it that way, LLMs are iterating so quickly, are improving so quickly, that already it is difficult to discern whether an output is AI generated or from a Supreme Court judge. And there have been several studies where, including from David Quest, KC, who I spoke to recently at an event in Cambridge where we were on a panel together. He has this pub quiz he almost does with some people where he shows an LLM generated version of a Supreme Court case pretending to be written by a certain judge, and then the actual judgment written by that judge. And in most cases, there is at least a 50-50 split where people believe that the LLM-generated draft is the real draft, is the real version of the judgment. So what I mean to say by this anecdote is that models are becoming so capable that it is only a matter of time until we can point to a model and say, that is good enough to have come from a human being. And therefore, in terms of core model performance, we are going to see lawyers say, well, the truth is that these models are at least as good as a lot of the lawyers in our firms. And therefore, culturally, can we afford to still not trust these models when they offer all these other opportunities for us? So I think, as with all human beings, there are those who are more risk averse. There are those who are quicker to adapt. There are those who follow and who are not the first adopters. We are going to see that same trend with this new technology. But at the end of the day, I think the sheer power of LLMs is going to um, erode the cultural and structural barriers that prevent them from being fully transformative.
Definitely. Yeah, I think trust is absolutely everything as well. Trust is money at the end of the day. If clients can trust
Totally.
you, they'll pay you more. If they don't trust you, then they'll go and find someone else.
All right.
Yeah.
Another thing people often say is, well, law firms are in a sense insurance brokers. They give you the advice, but they also give you the professional negligence cover that comes with being a regulated law firm.
Mm,
And and therefore, when you're a client and you're dealing with a high stakes issue, when you're if you're seeking external counsel's advice, it's not just because you want the answer to the question, but because you want to be able to sue them if they get the answer really wrong. So it's a matter of risk apportionment and risk allocation. Um, and what people used to say is, well, an AI company, an AI model can't take on that risk. It's not a regulated lawyer. Um,
mm,
but now we have companies coming along like Garfield AI. I recently spoke to Philip Young, the founder, who walked me through a pretty fascinating process of how he convinced the SRA to make his AI native firm into a regulated law firm. Um, and when it comes to the question uh, of an insurance company taking on that risk, the insurance companies operate, well, they don't necessarily care about whether you're a human being or an AI model. They care about the risk. And if an AI model is becoming similarly reliable to human beings in the quality of its outputs, then from a risk perspective, why shouldn't you insure that if you're an insurer? So I think we will increasingly see AI native firms coming along, and we are seeing them sprouting everywhere, where insurance companies are willing to back them. Now, whether those AI native firms are defensible when it comes to OpenAI and others verticalizing is a separate question. Um, I think AI native firms are just as, if not more, vulnerable to disruption and frankly drowning in the tidal wave than any other legal tech startup. But from a point of view of taking on risk and of being and of taking on that professional negligence cover, I think we will increasingly see AI native firms being given that cover and being given um, the ability by the SRA to practice.
mm. I think we've all seen the Channel 4 documentary with
Yes,
Garfield and the real human solicitor. And that brings
that's
you
right.
on nicely, actually, to our next question, which is if junior associates at some of these top Magic Circle firms, Alex, are being paid north of 150 grand a year, and they can do a lot of work that AI can also now handle, especially with Google Gemini 3, ChatGPT 5. And if that work were to disappear and less people were to work in those roles, and that means, the partner track shrinks, would law firms just become top heavy rainmakers and relationship managers? And what does the pyramid look like in the next 10 years, would you say?
So undoubtedly, LLMs are already and will increasingly be able to take on the work of junior lawyers, let alone trainees.
Mhm.
Um, and I think we have to accept that. Now, the question then becomes automatically, the pyramid is altered because you need far fewer people from the ground level to generate the, the, the first drafts and those first iterations of the work that end up with the partners.
Mm.
But then the question becomes, how do you become a partner in 10 years' time? Where do those partners come from? Because if you take an average Magic Circle firm that hires, let's say, 50 to 100 trainees in each cohort, out of which one or two become partners, so you have a 1 to 2% rate of trainee to partner conversion. If you're reducing your trainee intake by an order of magnitude, how do you get any partners out of that? Um, and 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 that becomes a real question. And then even for the trainees that you do take on and the associates that you do take on, let's say they're much more capable than the average. Let's say the standards have to increase because your relevance as a junior lawyer is ensured in the age of LLMs only by your ability to spar with a highly powerful LLM, which means that you're likely to be more it means that your cognitive abilities are likely to have to be much higher than the already high demands required by these top firms. But let's say you do become one of those carefully selected trainees and junior associates that work with LLMs. If so much work is done by the LLMs, how can you still train as a lawyer in the same way that you used to train? If your work as a junior lawyer is being so assisted, if not totally being completed by an LLM? I think there are a few answers to this question. I do not think the final answer has been arrived at. One answer is simply that your relationship as a junior lawyer with an LLM is one where it is a sparring partner, where you're using the LLM to enhance the final output that you are delivering to your partner for review. And I've spoken to many big law firm partners who've said, because of the presence of LLMs, I expect what my junior associates give me to be much better than what they used to give me, because the research period that I used to give them, let's say 2 days to prepare a memo, should really be taking a couple of hours. And then the rest of that time can be taken by them using their legal expertise to add the nuance that really they have been trained to do. So there is a relationship where actually you do not reduce the number of lawyers in the firm, or you don't reduce it drastically, but you simply you massively enhance the capabilities of your pool of lawyers, enable them to do more work for more clients, by allowing them to use LLMs to enhance and to effectively act as force multipliers. Now, there's another world where you do slim down the number of junior lawyers and trainees you have, and where the LLMs are not just enhancing the work that they're doing, but the LLMs are in fact simulating some of the hardest work for these junior lawyers that they wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to do. So currently, it's quite rare that a junior lawyer or a trainee is invited to interact directly with a client or to be in a direct commercial or legal negotiation, in the same way that the partners from two top firms would be engaged with the night before a deal closes. There is no reason why you cannot use an LLM to simulate that sort of extremely high stakes, sophisticated work for those much more junior people, such that you're actually giving them much more experience than they would otherwise get. So they do less proofreading, but they do more simulation of highly complex contractual negotiations, commercial thinking, if you like, that clients really care about. And there are already startups coming along that are seeing that opportunity, seeing LLMs as actually a training opportunity rather than a replacement mechanism for junior lawyers. And I see that as being very exciting. So the truth is, I think some firms are going to slim down massively and go for a small elite cadre of junior lawyers that interact on a sort of sparring basis with LLMs to generate higher quality outputs. And then you're going to have firms that keep more or less their intakes in terms of the size, but prioritize a sort of growth mindset where they think we're going to use LLMs to train our lawyers better than we've ever been able to train them before, and enable our lawyers to do more work than they've ever been able to do before. Then the question becomes, from an economic point of view, how do those law firms actually fund that business model? Do the expected revenues from taking on more clients actually materialize? Are we paying people too much? Is £150,000 really a sustainable business model where, as you say, you can get models to do a lot of that work virtually for free, and you only need a small pool of experts to use those models to enhance their work? So this is an unresolved question. As you can tell, I don't know the answer either, but I think there are more imaginative ways of dealing with this problem than simply saying AI is going to replace lawyers or AI is going to replace junior lawyers. I think there's huge opportunity here for AI to enhance the training and the ability to take on more work of junior lawyers. And it's really up to the individual to approach AI in the right way, such that they become one of the lawyers enhanced by AI rather than one of the lawyers replaced by AI.
Definitely. And I think a lot of that grunt work that everyone loves to automate with AI, whether that's document review,
Mm,
contract drafting, due diligence, that's all where, junior lawyers learn. And, we want to be able to develop our judgment, and it's our judgment that clients pay very
right,
handsomely for, right? And I think
right.
if we give it all to the AI and then we're just reviewing the output, then we're just, we're learning to edit. We're not really learning to develop our judgment. And so I think actually a lot of it is in the power of these legal AI companies. We've seen with ChatGPT and with Google Gemini, you can now turn on these guided learning features. And I
Mm,
think having a guided learning feature into Harvey, into Lagore would be really powerful. For instance, if you could like set up a profile and it knows I'm a second year solicitor apprentice and I'm doing my third ever contract review or contract drafting, and then my supervisor, who's a partner, his profile would be, I don't know, he's been working in a law firm for 20 years and he's doing his 4,000th contract review, and actually it gives me more help, or the AI helps and like challenges me and gives me more scaffolding compared to the partner where it can
mm.
just spit out all the answer and he already knows what he's looking for because he's been doing it for 20 years. To be able to develop our judgment is down to a lot of the legal tech companies to implement that. Um,
I completely agree. Yeah. And up to the imagination of the individual lawyer to say, well, I'm going to take this new development with sort of a healthy enthusiasm rather than a suspicion or a fear.
mm,
And I can already sort of, I've spoken to a lot of lawyers, and you can almost categorize them into being unduly optimistic about AI to being unduly pessimistic about AI, and then everything in between. And I think you have to be somewhere between. I mean, you basically have to have a healthy dose of optimism, a real humility about what your skills are as a human being, and the fact that many of those are replaceable by a model. And then that process needs to lead you to a position where you can identify through that gap analysis, well, while LLMs develop further, what can I still bring to the table? And then you need to absolutely maximize that human value add that you can bring, while making the most of what LLMs can bring to you as a lawyer.
As I said earlier, I think a lot of my audience are students,
Mm.
students at some amazing universities across the country, and I want you to cast your mind back to when you were a Cambridge law student and you were deciding you had two options on the table. Either you could go and do a training contract, or you could maybe join a grad scheme at Harvey Lagora or a legal AI startup. Um, which would you go for, or maybe would you do both almost again?
Hmm. It's a very good question. Now, I tend to think, and if I look at the way that my group here is structured and the way I structured my group within my startup,
Mm,
I had real experts in everything that they did. So I didn't have many people who sat on the fence between law and tech. I had either extremely experienced lawyers, or I had world leading AI scientists. My suggestion would be that if you have gone through all the pain, and of course, there's plenty of opportunity and fun in it, but all the pain of a law degree, I would go all the way on the legal side and become a real domain expert, rather than dilute basically my legal expertise with some relatively superficial technical expertise, and then sit at this awkward midpoint between being a technologist and a lawyer.
mm,
I would want to be a lawyer first, but have a have a deep understanding of the technology, its limits and its opportunities. Um, and I would then target working at a law firm that has a real interest in being relevant in the age of AI. And you can tell, even from public statements, that there are some law firms that have taken very little interest in AI. And then there are other law firms that are creating schemes where they are sending their lawyers off to learn about AI. They're sending their lawyers on tech MBAs. Linklaters recently announced, as you noted in your recent newsletter, that the AI lawyer scheme is taking off with a group of 20 initially.
Yeah.
I would be targeting firms like those so that I'm getting the very best of a legal education and having that core defensibility in the age of AI for being an expert in this domain. And then I would be secondarily going to a firm that has the real interest in being an early mover in AI. Um, Now, I would say that there are then opportunities down the line to work in or with legal tech companies. So, something I'm setting up here at Thomson Reuters is a secondment scheme, or I hope to set this up anyway, where we are going to borrow lawyers from some of the world's biggest law firms and offer them the opportunity to upskill in an LLM research lab to really understand how LLMs work, how they're trained, to imbue those LLMs with their legal knowledge and expertise, and then to go back to their firm 6 or 12 months later with effectively a master's degree level knowledge of how to train an AI model, how to deal with an AI model. So I think, in short, you can have your cake and eat it too, but I would start by being an extremely well qualified lawyer. And then I would seek every opportunity within and outside of that firm to increase that knowledge and expertise. And if you're really rogue, you might just set up a legal tech company as well and see
Yeah,
how that
well,
goes.
just on the way, just casually.
That's right.
And do you think the future of legal tech innovation is going to come from lawyers or technologists that have never worked in a law firm? We're seeing a lot of people have worked at who are getting funding from YC, who have never worked in a law firm but yet have a legal tech startup. Do you think experience can be hired in, or do you think it really helps to have experienced it firsthand?
Yeah, I mean, I w- I was. I mean, I'm sure you can look at the Harvey founding team because they have some legal expertise among them too. But I was definitely unusual in being the founder and CEO of an AI company, having no AI experience whatsoever, and not having ever written a line of code so much. That was traditionally seen as a bit of a weakness. I, of course, mitigated it by having a very talented team of technical colleagues who I brought in from sort of MIT, Harvard, those sorts of places to really drive the science side of it. Um, but the truth is that I wouldn't have been able to do it without them, and they wouldn't have been able to do it without me, because I'm the one who brings the law firms on board, who tells them the legal use cases. They're the ones who make it a reality. In a sense, we are both commoditized sort of add-ons to the other, in that they can hire in legal experts and I can hire in technical expertise. So I don't think the starting point is too important, whether or not you have legal expertise or not. My personal experience is that if you are a startup founded by a lawyer, you're more likely to sell successfully to lawyers than. And the truth is that I've had so many conversations with scientists who, you know, assumed that the average length of a contract is 5 pages or something. And, and then I say, well, have you ever seen a prospectus? Have you ever seen an SPA? So the truth is, we both have fundamental knowledge gaps that the others are able to fill, technical and legal. And my preference would be that lawyers start legal tech companies and then bring in the technical talent to make it possible, because that's what I did and that's what worked for me.
Mm.
But equally, it's not a set formula. And the most important thing is that, and I repeat my previous point, you have both the real world, high quality legal domain expertise, which helps you improve your technology, but also helps you sell your product to the industry. And then you also need to have somewhere in the room a pretty world-leading scientific team, if you want to start a company today, that will enable you to remain relevant when the tidal waves come from OpenAI, from Google DeepMind. When they eventually verticalize into this industry, you need a team as least as good as them, um, on a person-by-person basis, to say that your technology is resilient to those developments. So you need both. I prefer having a lawyer first in the room, but frankly, there's no set formula for it.
So looking ahead, Alex, into 2026, what do you think we're going to see in the legal AI space?
To repeat our previous points, we're going to see more consolidation. I think we're going to see previously like mid-sized players who attracted, 10, 20 million in funding, we're going to see those contract because Harvey and Legora and Norm AI increasingly are sucking up the oxygen in the room. So we're going to see further consolidation into a number of companies that you can count on one hand. We're also going to see the increased presence of big tech companies directly in legal tech. So as we've said before, we're talking here about OpenAI's direct involvement in law via DocuGPT. We're likely to see similar moves by other players, including likely custom model training operations run by big tech companies directly with law firms. So that's good for the big tech companies, and that's good for the small pool of elite legal tech companies like Harvey and Legora. It's not such good news for the small players, and it's very bad news for anyone who wants to start a startup today. But as I've said before, there is a formula that you can still follow to create a successful legal tech company. It just means that the barrier to entry is much higher, but you just need to rise to the challenge. So it will still be possible in 2026 to set up a successful legal tech company. And you can learn from the mistakes of some of these bigger players. You can learn from their weaknesses and try to solve those gaps rather than trying to replicate what those companies are doing. Now, that's on the legal tech industry side. If we look at the law firm side, I'm not sure we're going to see that much more in 2026 on the law firm side that we didn't see in 2025. We're going to see the main tech-led law firms, we're talking the A&Os of the world, the Linklaters, Clifford Chances of the world, developing more of their own specialized tools. We're going to be seeing them expand their in-house AI and engineering teams. We're going to see law firms place much more emphasis on their data to convert the data in the knowledge of their lawyers, but also in their precedents into data that LLMs can read and act upon. I'm not sure we're going to see a big firm translating itself into an AI native firm in 2026. I think we're going to see a couple of players do that more in the 2028 to 29 region, just because the decision-making flows in these firms take time. And there's a certain generational issue here where there is, let's say, a more senior generation of decision makers who are, in some cases, obstructing the process of AI adoption. And we're seeing them gradually being replaced by a younger generation of faster movers. So that's, I think, just as a result of a generational thing, going to take a little bit longer. But we are going to see the likes of global firms translating into AI native firms closer to 2030, I think. But we'll see one or two in the sort of 2027 to 2028 region. And I think what we will see a lot of is AI native startups coming up. So let's say associate level lawyers coming out of some of these big firms saying we're going to create an insolvency focused AI native firm, litigation focused AI native firm. I have my skepticism about these companies because I think they have very limited technical defensibility. They might have good legal expertise, but they're going to struggle with a technical defensibility point. I think they're going to suffer the same fate as a lot of the other smaller and medium-sized players with the consolidation into Harvey happening, but there's going to be a lot more of that. We're also going to see legal tech funds increasing the amount that they're raising for their funds. And there's some evidence already that the legal tech VC capital universe is increasing, but it's actually decreasing in the number of businesses it's investing in. So we're looking away from smaller seed size tickets of, let's say, 500,000 to 1 million, and we're moving much more into the Series A territory. So there's going to be much more of a wilderness for startups to cross by themselves before they're big enough to be really interesting to the changing nature of legal tech investment now. But all in all, what does that mean? It means that lawyers are going to have access to more AI. They're going to have more training, more opportunities to upskill in AI. It's going to be harder to create a legal tech startup than it ever was before. But if you get it right, the opportunity is greater than it ever was before. And if you're a prudent law firm leader, you will be on the front foot converting your data into something that an LLM can use. And then you will be entering into direct relationships with big tech companies to develop custom models or maybe even to develop your own smaller models as a law firm. Um, so we're going to see an extremely crowded market of a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. Um, and what's going to determine the winners in this market are those who have the fundamentals in place. The fundamentals being the best legal expertise and the most defensible proprietary technology. Um, Maybe that's all a series of truisms, maybe it isn't, but from my perspective, that's what we can look forward to.
I definitely agree with like the productization of that institutional knowledge, maybe into some like agents. That's a very hot word of
Hmm,
2025.
very hard word.
Into a chat bot that can then be sold directly from the law firm to their clients. And comes
Absolutely.
with that, you're gonna have to hire in the talent, like you said, the product engineers, people working in product and the marketing for that as well. So yeah, it can be interesting to see how that plays out in 2026. Thank you.
It's going to be very interesting.
Mm,
Um, and just if I was just going to say one last thing at the
yeah.
end, at a more personal level, lawyers are trained to be risk averse, and I have come across so many extremely talented lawyers, and the truth is, the law attracts such talented and intelligent people. Um, but I've come across so many extremely intelligent lawyers who have brilliant ideas, but who decide, because in part because they are so intelligent, that oh, there are too many risks. I couldn't possibly start. Um, my restrictive covenant in my training contract or in my law firm engagement is too strong, or the competitive landscape is too ferocious. And much of what I've said confirms those fears.
Mhm.
But I would just emphasize that having operated in the startup world, having seen um, the variable, often questionable level of thinking and intelligence that exists in the startup world, lawyers are so well placed to create a defensible idea, to take a systematic approach to building it and building a team around it, and then to executing it with precision. That is something lawyers are very well placed to do. So I would ask any lawyers listening to this who might have ideas, who might want to start something, to put the risk aside and to think more of the opportunity and the fact that they are so well suited to potentially deliver something that is industry changing and in the smaller way, world changing as well. So I really do encourage your listeners to take the risk, to make the most of life in that respect, because it's something I did and I have no regrets.
Alex, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and being my first ever guest. I'm sure you've inspired lots of people in the audience. How can people find you after the podcast?
They're more than welcome to get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I have a very long name, Alexander Samuel Kardos-Nyheim, but if you can find me there, I'm always happy to talk, always happy to work through ideas with you and help you give it your best shot.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex.
Real pleasure, George. Thank you so much.
Thank you.